The night was dark and the sky was filled with stars. A cool breeze was blowing and the sound of crickets filled the air. The Mexican bus was making its way up the winding mountain road. It was an old bus, the kind that had been used for decades to transport people from one place to another. The bus had seen better days, but it was still sturdy and reliable. The passengers were a mix of locals and tourists, all eager to get to their destination. The driver was a seasoned veteran of the mountain road, having driven this route for many years. He knew every turn, every dip, and every pothole on the road. He had seen it all, or so he thought. As the bus made its way up the mountain, the driver noticed something strange. There was a figure standing by the side of the road just ahead of the bus. The figure was tall and thin and wore a long black cloak that covered its entire body. The driver slowed the bus down and peered out the window, trying to get a better look at the figure. But as the bus got closer, the figure disappeared into the darkness. The driver shrugged it off and continued driving. But as he did, he felt a sense of unease creeping up on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the bus rounded a bend in the road, the driver saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure was back, standing in the middle of the road. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The bus skidded off the road and tumbled down the mountain, crashing into the rocks below. When the rescuers arrived at the scene of the accident, they found a scene of utter devastation. The bus was a twisted wreck, and the bodies of the passengers were scattered all around. It was a miracle that anyone had survived at all. They discovered that they had all seen the figure on the road before the accident. They had all felt a sense of unease and had all experienced strange things since the crash. They began to wonder if the figure on the road had something to do with their experiences. The survivors decided to investigate the figure on the road. They asked around and found out that there had been many accidents on that stretch of road over the years. Some said that the figure was a ghost, a spirit that haunted the mountain road. Others said that it was a demon, a creature that preyed on the souls of those who dared to travel the road at night. The survivors were determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. They decided to go back to the scene of the accident to see if they could find any clues. As they made their way up the mountain road, they saw the figure again standing in the middle of the road. This time, they didn't stop. They drove right through the figure, and as they did, they heard a loud scream. The figure disappeared, and the survivors felt a sense of relief. But as they reached the spot where the accident had occurred, they saw something that made their blood run cold. There, at the bottom of the mountain, was the wreckage of the Mexican bus. It was exactly as they had left it, with the bodies of the passengers still scattered around. The survivors were confused and scared. How was it possible that they had just driven through the figure, only to find the wreckage of the bus at the bottom of the mountain? They decided to investigate further and started to explore the area as they walked around. They saw something that made their hearts skip a beat. The figure was back, standing just a few feet away from them. It was a tall, thin creature with long, bony fingers and a face that was twisted in a grotesque grin. The survivors tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It grabbed them one by one, dragging them into the darkness. The survivors woke up in a strange place, surrounded by darkness. They were no longer in the mountains, but in a dark, eerie tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and strange noises echoed through the darkness. As they stumbled through the tunnel, they saw something that made them stop dead in their tracks. It was a group of people, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing in a circle. In the center of the circle was a tall figure, dressed in a black cloak. It was the figure from the road. The survivors watched in horror as the figure began to speak. It told them that they were in a place between life and death, a place where lost souls were trapped. The figure had been sent to collect them, to add them to its collection of souls. The survivors were terrified. They tried to run, but the figure was too powerful. It grabbed them one by one, dragging them into the circle. They were powerless to resist, and soon they were all standing in the circle, surrounded by the figure and the other lost souls. The survivors realized that they were trapped in the tunnel with no way out. They were at the mercy of the figure, and they knew that they were going to die. But then something strange happened. The figure began to change. Its cloak fell away, revealing a face that was human. The figure was a man who had been trapped in the tunnel for centuries. He had been cursed to collect the souls of the living, to add them to his collection of lost souls. But as he spoke to the survivors, he began to realize the horror of his own existence. He was trapped just like they were. The survivors pleaded with the man to help them escape. They begged him to find a way out of the tunnel, to help them return to the world of the living. The man listened, and then he did something unexpected. He took off his own cloak and placed it on one of the survivors. He told them that the cloak would protect them from the darkness, and that it would guide them back to the world of the living. The survivors thanked the man, and then they began to run. The survivors ran through the tunnel, following the light of the cloak. They could hear the man's voice, urging them on. They stumbled and fell, but they never gave up. They were determined to escape the tunnel, to return to the world of the living. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they saw a light. It was a faint light, but it was enough to give them hope. They ran towards the light, and as they did, the tunnel began to crumble around them. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and the ground shook beneath their feet. But the survivors kept running until they burst out of the tunnel into the bright light of day. They were free from the curse of the man in the black cloak. They fell to their knees, grateful to be alive. As they looked around, they saw that they were back in the mountains. They could see the wreckage of the Mexican bus, but it was different now. It was no longer twisted and mangled, but whole and undamaged. The survivors realized that they had been given a second chance. They had been given the chance to escape the darkness and to return to the world of the living. They stood up and started to walk towards the wreckage of the bus. They knew that they had to see it, to face the horror of what had happened. As they approached the bus, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The figure was back, standing in the middle of the wreckage. It was staring at them, its face twisted in a grotesque grin. The The survivors knew that they couldn't let the figure win. They took off the cloak and threw it towards the figure. The cloak hit the figure, and it disappeared into the darkness. The survivors breathed a sigh of relief, and then they started to walk away. They knew that they had faced their fears and that they had come out on top. They had beaten the curse of the man in the black cloak, and they had won their freedom. The survivors returned to their homes, but they were never the same. They had seen things that no one should ever have to see, and they had faced horrors that most people couldn't imagine, but they were stronger for it. They knew that they had been given a second chance, and they vowed to make the most of it. They became advocates for safe travel, and they warned others about the dangers of the mountain road. But most importantly, they never forgot about the man in the black cloak. They knew that he was still out there, still collecting lost souls. And they knew that they had a duty to help others, to guide them away from the darkness and towards the light. The survivors had won their freedom, but they knew that their battle was far from over. They had faced the horror of the Mexican bus, but they had emerged victorious, and they knew that they would never forget the lessons they had learned or the friends they had lost. If you like my story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for more and similar stories.